with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience.
Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. Today we have a very special guest, but before we get started with that, let's talk about our podcast of the week.
Yes, and this week we're going to talk real quickly about Court Games. And what Court Games is it is a podcast all about Legend of the Five Rings. They have interviews with game designers and authors for the Legend of the Five Rings role-playing game, discussions and breakdowns of the stories that accompany the living card game, reviews of the games, game mastering tips for running it, and all sorts of information about the culture and lore of the Legend of the Five Rings world and of historical Japan that you can use in your campaigns. So if you're interested in Legend of the Five Rings or curious, go to courtgamespod.com and you can find out more there. And of course, we'll link it in the show notes as we always do.
And you can always find them on the D20 Radio Network.
Yes.
Plug.
So
we have a guest today, Steve, and we're talking about solo RPGs?
Yes.
Something that neither of us really have any experience with?
Yes. We're going to talk about some solo RPG gaming today. And this was actually a topic that was requested by one of our Discord users. But I'm going to introduce our guest here. His name is John Lopez. And while I know he does some writing of some solo gaming products, he doesn't actually write games themselves. So in any case, John, welcome to the show. And if you would like to kind of explain to us maybe a little bit of what you do.
Yeah, thanks you both Steves for having me on the show. Yeah, my name is John, and I run the solo RPG Patreon. Yeah, and basically what I do, I play a lot of solo role-playing games, and I create a weekly resource for other solo players to use in their own games. So that can be anything from a solo rule set to an adventure seed or something like a randomizing location, something to generate adventures, to create your own solo experience.
Okay.
Yeah, that's basically it.
Okay, so like my extent of knowledge with solo games really kind of comes back to, the old like Fabled Lands, choose your own adventure stuff. And I mean, I've become aware enough of the scene to know that it's progressed a significant amount beyond that. But like the only solo title I think I have in my collection, or solo design title, I should say, perhaps, is Sean Tompkins' Ironsworn.
Oh yeah.
I haven't actually gotten to reading it yet. So, if you would walk us kind of through maybe what is solo gaming at this point, in 2021?
Yeah, well, that's I guess that's an interesting question. I mean, the nature of solo role playing means that it's can be quite a different experience for whoever's playing. So one solo role playing game experience for one person can be very much different than someone else's game. Which I think is also part of the fun, of course. But you mentioned Fabled Lands. I guess that's a good starting point. Lots of people know the kind of choose your own adventure type games, of type reading books, more. You flip to a page and then you read what your character comes across. I think Fabled Lands is kind of interesting because it takes a sandbox approach to that game format, so you can basically keep on going within the Fabled Lands world, which is also kind of I think a little hint for me at least about what's good about solo role playing or the solo role playing experience, because it basically allows you to create your own world exactly like the way you like it. I mean, we all, at least if I look at in my gaming closet, there's lots of books that I never got to play with a group. Books from the 90s, for example, like really obscure role-playing games that I never could get a group with. And I think the experience in 2020, 2021 for me was really getting to play exactly the kind of role playing games that I personally am interested in without going through the hassle and the scheduling hell of getting an actual group together. So that was really for me a kind of liberating experience when I moved from the choose your own adventure type game books to an actual solo game. That was a really mind blowing experience. I think my first experience with solo role playing in that regard was Mythic by Tana Pigeon,
Okay.
which is a kind of Oracle system, a GM emulator. And yeah, that's I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's basically what Ironsworn is less the game. So Ironsworn is kind of a mixture between a game and a solo oracle, a system where you can ask the oracle questions about your situation or circumstance, and you get the answers.
Hmm.
And Mythic is kind of like an add-on you can use with any role-playing game, normal role-playing game that you are interested.
Okay, so I've heard this oracle term before, and I'm guessing there's probably no one given answer to it, but what is an oracle?
Yeah, what is an oracle? Or yeah, I agree. It's kind of a weird a weird name for what it is. It's I like the fact that in Mythic it's a GM emulator, and I think that's more appropriate because it's if you boil it down to what it is, it's just a framework, a way to ask questions about your character's situation or circumstance and get an answer that yeah kind of gives you some creative prompts to formulate something in your head. It's basically like what a GM does. Also, if you ask a GM, what do I see? That answer is basically also what you get from an Oracle or a GM emulator.
Okay, so they kind of, as you're saying, they enable play of systems that have never had solo stuff written for them?
Oh, definitely. Personally, my preferred way of my preferred solo experience is just pick up whatever role playing game system I like at the moment, and then use GM emulator or a set of solo Oracle systems to just go ahead and play.
Okay. That sounds, I mean, I mean, clearly, with COVID and all these things, and people, staying home and like you said, even the hassles of scheduling and trying to get people together, it's gotta be an attractive option. Do you find that any particular style of game tends to work better solo? Be it like, to me, I would think maybe more technical, crunchy games, like, we'll just say like a Robotech type thing or something like that might not translate well, or is that just my brain going in weird directions?
Well, I don't know in which direction your brain normally goes, of course, but no, I think there's no specific rule set or role playing game system that wouldn't lend itself to solo role playing. For example, I like as far as crunchy systems goes, I like Hackmaster, for example, for the old Hackmaster
Okay,
by Kenshiko. That's quite crunchy, but it's a joy to use an Oracle or a GM emulator.
okay,
You're only really replacing the input a GM yeah adds to the table. So you're any system that can use a GM, which is any role playing game system, is also playable using a solo role playing oracle.
okay. So now, like, how do these oracles, like, I get what they do. How do they work? Are they like a deck of cards? Is it effectively a random table? Is it a computer program? An app for your phone, or all of the above?
Yeah, basically all of the above. But maybe it's better to explain it from a different approach. Basically, you're getting an answer about your situation or circumstance. So when you all boil it down to the most simplest form, it could be just getting a yes or no question. Is there a kobold in the next room? Yes or no? That's sort of what what you expect if you boil it all down to the essentials. for example. But you could also take it way more subjectively and ask, for example, how is the person I'm talking to in the tavern looking at me, or yeah, how does his emotions come across, for example? And then you would also use random tables or all of the above, as you mentioned, and get like a creative series of prompts that you can interpret yourself. I personally I like to think of solo role playing as a game of interpretation. If you put, for example, I've seen in a couple of writer workshops an interesting experiment where you put a lot of writers in one room and you give them about 5 creative prompts, and if you let them write a short story, what you would get is basically almost always the same kind of stories, because in our heads, as players or as writers or as creative people, there are influences and all sorts of TV series, movies, books we've read that all work together to form our creative inner world, as it. And I like solo role playing because it allows you to give that creative world space to go in all sorts of interesting directions that maybe you yourself hadn't really thought of. And I think if you want an idea of what an oracle or a GM emulator can be, it's both that yes or no question, but it's also that creative energy that allows you to go in directions that you didn't really think of.
Okay.
Which is also an answer you probably it's a little hard to see. I like to tell people yeah, just sit down with an oracle, with a simple oracle like the Solo Recluse engine, and just ask questions about your circumstance and situation, and the surprise will happen. Whatever you do, there will be a time where you will be surprised, and you will have to be creative to interpret what the result is.
Okay, so I sort of understand where you're coming from. That's really neat, actually. I've seen a couple systems where you have a full table of people where essentially the DM is doing that or the GM is doing that. That's really interesting. So I honestly I didn't really know much about the solo RPG systems, and we were really excited to have you on because neither of us have really touched them. I've done a little bit of sort of old school computer gaming back when you had text-based adventures, and it kind of sounds it's a little bit of mix between that and a mix between playing with like a magic 8 ball that answers your questions essentially.
Well, yes. Well, you mentioned video games. My day job is a creative producer for video games, so it's might be interesting to look at it from the video game perspective. Like emergent gameplay is very much a thing in the video game industry, and the same is basically what you're trying to do in a solo role playing game. You're laying down the groundwork, as it were, to have a kind of emergent narrative and emergent gameplay, stuff that you didn't really think of, but is happening regardless of your preparation. So it goes into directions that your creative mind takes you, but it's not necessarily what you prepared or what you thought that would happen. If that happens, for me, that's a great solo experience.
Okay, awesome. All right, yeah, that makes a lot of sense in how you're describing it. That does make a lot of sense. So with these systems, sort of back to what Steve was saying, you said it's sort of a yes or no. Is it a how do you convert how do you convert say another system to use the Oracle? Are you are you creating tables prior to sessions or how does that really work? What's your prep look like?
Well, I think every solo player's prep looks a little different. You have people that really like to go heavy on creating your own random tables. You have people who like to use the input of whatever stuff, rule set, or adventure that they're using. For example, let's take basic fantasy for as an example. I don't know if you're familiar with basic fantasy.
Doesn't ring a bell. I mean, I'm assuming that's a title, not just classic, fantasy gaming world.
It's a system like a retro clone OSR rule set. It's basically a Dungeons and Dragons clone, freely available. So it's a handy system to use as a reference because everyone can try it.
Okay.
Uh, for example, if you take an adventure module from Basic Fantasy, it wouldn't be all that different from a normal Dungeons and Dragons old school adventure module. where you take, for example, the box descriptions. Usually in the older Dungeons and Dragons modules, the box descriptions kind of were based around what a character in that position or circumstance would have as input. So you get the description of the room, you get the any monsters that are immediately apparent would be described in the description, and anything that sight, smell, or sounds, that would be all part of the description. But when you use that in a solo role playing environment, that becomes your input to ask questions. And normally, if the GM, for example, in the older school adventures, they would read the description and then play would evolve from there. And the same thing could happen in a solo role playing game where you just take the box text descriptions as input for what your character sees, his situation and circumstance, and you ask questions. For example, if the box text description would have kind of singed curtains drawn across the room, and as a character, I would decide to investigate those singed curtains, maybe see what made them singed. Was it an acid? Was it fire? For example, I would then roll on my oracle, for example, to see where the adventure would take me, and if that would be different than what the published adventure would be, yeah, then there are several ways you can use to funnel what happens into the context of the published adventure. But that's basically to show you what happens when you just you can just pick up an adventure and just start playing solo. It's not all that different as an experience from what you're used to. It's just, I think, more methodical, because you have to really funnel yourself into a way of thinking about your surrounding and situation and circumstance to get game elements from that.
Right. So it sort of forces you to ask the questions where having a GM there would sort of just explain the situation a little bit more.
Yeah, well, in the case of the singed curtains, for example, the GM would probably, depending on the GM, they would have an idea about why the curtains were singed, because they have read the entire module. In this case, I'm taking the approach that I go through the module step by step, and my input is my input for play. So those singed curtains could take a whole different meaning than the intent of the module, and my solo toolkit would make sure it would stay within the context but still be a surprise for me. So that's basically the GM emulation part. The Oracle part is more asking question about your surrounding and getting an immediate answer, while the GM emulation part is what every player likes to do to keep their results within the context of what they're doing. Obviously, if I had a random table there and I ask, how does the curtains look like? What do the curtains look like? Or is there anything on the curtains? If I would get the result, there's a spaceship. Yeah, that would be a little bit out of context. So every solo role player usually has a little system of random tables, or like a way to funnel their experience within the context of what they're trying to do at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it sounds really intriguing, and I know you had sent me a while back when we first started talking on Twitter. You sent me a write up of you called it an actual play, which I guess it was that you had done, and it felt very much to me like it reminded me of creative writing exercises that I had to do way, way, way back when, in my freshman creative writing class in college, in a lot of ways, that
Mm.
it was kind of just a series of prompts that, okay, so here's this idea, see what happens here. And I guess, when you explain it this way, it does really feel like that is a lot of what role playing is, right? It's just we just don't usually write it down.
Yeah, and I don't think writing it down is necessarily a part of solo role playing. For example, I like to write my stuff down because I like I like to write. But when I play with my son, for example, we do a lot of GM-less duo games where we both take a character and we have the same kind of experience. But with two players, it's we don't write it. I don't write anything down. It's just goes. Sort of like the same as in a group play. What happens is something you say, something you describe, something you reach a consensus about. Then you take a moment to reflect, and then you move on, and nothing is written down. I also know, for example, lots, not a lot, but I know a few people who like to record what they're doing. So they take a descriptive approach, but they just record it in an audio format, and then they go from there.
That makes sense. I mean, yeah, it just sounds like it's almost, I don't wanna say a different mental space than playing normally. For me, it feels almost like writing an adventure that you intend to play with other people, but never taking it to that level. Like you're coming up with the story, you know, almost maybe perhaps a little more like writing a story as a, I don't wanna say as opposed, but it's a little.
Maybe you should describe your mental space when you're gaming, because I don't know. If you're comparing it with your mental space while gaming, I would be interesting to hear your mental space.
Yeah, well, it's for me, a lot of times, it's what I, like a lot about gaming is the not knowing what's coming around the corner and you know, the anticipation of the unknown, or the, you know, trying to figure out what's next. And, you know, like, for me, I guess doing what you're talking about, I'm not saying I wouldn't enjoy it at all, because I think it would be a really fun experience, but for me, I think it would be a very different experience.
Well, I think you're describing the exact same kind of experience. The only thing that's different is that your GM is in control of what is around that corner, what gameplay emerges from the groundwork that you're in at the moment. And in solo role playing, that's at least in solo role playing using GM emulation and solo role playing tools. That same kind of anticipation of the unexpected happens, and the same kind of emergent gameplay happens. Only it's for the moment resides somewhere in your creative subconsciousness and comes out when you use and when you see and come across creative prompts by your system, generated by your system. So it's the same. I would argue it's the same kind of gameplay that you're after, and the same kind of mental space. The only difference is that there is no one to guide you through that, and it's all in your head.
No, that's fair. I get what you're saying, and yeah, you're probably quite right. I'm known to confuse myself and overthink things a lot, so.
So let me ask sort of a simple question, but I know all of our questions have been kind of simple so far. What does combat look like? Are you rolling two sets of dice, or say in a D&D type system where you have opposed checks where you're fighting a monster? Are you rolling for that monster? Is the system rolling for that? How is that? What sort of walk me through what a combat would really look like?
Well, a combat for me would look like, combat would look like combat, I suppose. The descriptive element would be, just like the GM would describe what happens in combat. Only thing is in that, if we take Dungeons and Dragons, for example, like a basis, then the combat would be on the one hand the rule set. So what happens in the rule set, just like a normal game, but the descriptive element would, for me, be very important and would be, I think, exactly the same. I would write it down because I like the memento after play. But there is not much of a difference for me as far as combat goes. No.
Okay. All right. So, and that's as far as the descriptive side goes. Is there a lot of um okay, so I think I understand what you're saying. So you're saying that, if I make an attack and I miss, you're just sort of describing that. Are you still rolling dice for the combat? I know that's sort of an odd question, but are you still rolling the dice for the combat? Are you still playing into that?
Yeah, I get what you mean, but I think you do have to understand. I'm obviously answering out of my own, what I like to do. Just like
Understood completely.
just like in any other role playing games, there are certainly groups that boil down the combat to a kind of strategic, kind of a war game approach to what you're doing, and there are groups that adopt a kind of theater of the mind. For me personally, I like to use the combat element in the rule set that I'm using as a groundwork, and anything that goes beyond the rule set, just like in a normal group game, for example. If you take an action that is really cool in combat, but necessitates the GM to kind of make a ruling or decide what the outcome of an event is, that is where the solo role-playing rule set bit element comes in. And personally, I like to use as much of the normal rule set as possible, because one thing that is really fun for me as a solo role player is I get to use all those different kind of rule sets. So if I were to not use a large part of the rule set, that would be quite a shame.
Okay.
Yeah, I know I backed the new Twilight 2000 that Free League Publishing is putting out. And I
Yeah,
know I remember one of the stretch goals is they were going to include solo play rules with it,
yeah.
which was something I found interesting. Although, as of yet, obviously it hasn't shipped, although the backers, I believe, we've gotten the alpha, but I don't think there was anything about the solo stuff in that. Um, but it sounds like then, yeah, it is a little different, but it's very much the same. So when you're talking about these solo rules or and oracles, are there like standards within the industry? I mean, I know these are largely coming from a lot of smaller independent publishers, but going on drive through, I see a lot of solo rules for various games, be it Blades in the Dark, Assorted, Free League, all kinds of games. So
Yeah.
there's enough interest. There's a lot of it out there, but I guess I don't even know where to start looking.
No, I can imagine. And also, as we're talking about the rule sets and what is solo role playing, I think there's a tendency to think that, and I see that all the time in people who take up solo role playing. Usually, they come to the discords and the places where solo role playing is discussed, and they always go through a phase where it seems that they're always hunting the next oracle set or the next set of random tables, and this will allow me to have the experience that I'm looking for. Well, my experience is more like, yeah, the less is more. So when you all boil it down to what you want your imagination to really flourish and have that emergent gameplay experience. And for me, yeah, it's really about less is more. The less elements I add to the mix, the more my creativity gets to do its thing, I suppose. It's just like GMing. I personally, when I GM for the group, I like to have my prep as less as possible, because I like to have that impromptu feeling of coming up with solutions and stuff on the fly. And that's the same for me. That's the same kind of takeaway I get from a solo role playing experience. That same energy that I get from when I'm a GM, to just come up with stuff on the fly and come up with descriptions on the fly and decide the direction of the story. Yeah, that's what I like also in solo role playing. And it's for you. You mentioned Twilight 2000. Uh, for example, and you also asked that there's a lot of solo role playing rule sets out there. I've noticed that over the year, maybe 2 years, there's a lot of Kickstarter goals that include the solo role playing as a kind of, yeah, like it's tacked on there. And
Mhm.
personally, I prefer the solo rule sets and the solo oracle systems to be kind of separate. I usually I don't find the solo rule sets that are tacked on to be really intuitive or really yeah, they feel tacked on because that's what usually they are.
Okay. No, that makes sense. So, like, so then I remember you mentioning a couple names, Mythic and such. What are some of the bigger or more popular solo rule sets that you would use to run any game?
That I would use to run. You mean rule sets or oracle sets?
Well, either and or both. I mean, we'll get there eventually, I'm sure, but yeah, like I said, this is really a situation where neither of us, we're kind of out of our depth in a lot of ways, in that we really just don't know a lot about this.
Well, let's get back to your depth then.
So I think your question more is, what's your go-to Oracle system? Because it sounds like you can almost take any system, any rule set that has pre-written modules and add it to an Oracle system, or even if it doesn't have pre-written modules. So I think more of what Steve's asking is, what's your go-to Oracle system to run the games that you like to play?
Well, the first part of your remark is exactly on the point. I think that's exactly what it is. And personally, for me, I like an oracle that not really gets in the way of the rule set that I'm using. And for me, that's usually the Recluse solo engine, which is a really simple way of answering questions, but it takes one element, and that's where it really shines. It takes away, or tries to take away, or lessen the impact of player presupposition. So when you're asking questions to an oracle, you will always have like player bias. For example, if I ask, if I let's say I'm in a dungeon as a character and there's a door, the door is stuck. There must be I hear sounds on the other side of the door. Then the player bias would be to ask questions to lessen the danger. For example, there's sometimes there's a tendency to do that. And what the solo recluse engine does is there's a chance that your presupposed the presupposition behind your question, for example, do I hear anything behind the door? It gets taken away. So the reason for asking the question then suddenly becomes invalid, and then you have to reinterpret what your circumstance or situation was up to that point. So that's for me that's a really interesting mechanic because it facilitates that emergent gameplay because it takes away your presupposed truths. So that's I think my favorite smaller oracle, and I use that quite a bit.
Okay, so you're saying the oracle you use as the GM emulator to so to speak answer the question that you would typically ask the person running the game, and then the for the most part you try to stay within the confines of the existing game system rules as opposed to tacking on extra solo stuff.
Yeah, personally, I do like to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, there's just a lot to absorb here. Like it sounds like something that would be. I really want to try this at some point. I'm just not sure where to go.
Well, that's an interesting problem. And when people who are interested in solo role playing games want to really try that, it's difficult for two reasons. The first is the reason that you mentioned. How do you try that? But immediately followed by that is also a very interesting question, I think, because you never really get an answer to what is this supposed to look and feel like, and that's because it's a really personal, but b the the format doesn't really lend itself to being recorded or being easily showed to other people. So it's always there always sometimes there is the doubt of am I doing this right? And that's especially when you're beginning, it's really difficult to answer that question because obviously the answer is if you're having fun, then you're doing it right. But the method of having fun is different for so many people. It's exactly the same for normal group play. Of course, there are lots of groups who wouldn't really enjoy playing the way another group plays, and they all have they settle down to what they think is a fun experience.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Like you said, everybody plays for different reasons in different ways, and so yeah, I guess that and yes, solo play is obviously going to be much more personal or personalized. Um, so I guess then maybe being is I know you're pretty heavily involved in this community. Are there you mentioned discords. Are there websites, discords, Reddits, whatever, where people talk about this a lot that or would be good places for anyone to go to try and gather information?
Oh yeah, definitely. There's the at least the one that I'm most part of is the Mythic GME Discord, which is the Mythic or the Discord channel that kind of goes with the Mythic GME, written by Tana Pigeon, which is a very detailed and fun set of solo oracles and GM emulation. That's the one that I really enjoy being a part of.
Okay. Boy, yeah, like, my head's kind of I don't wanna say spinning, but, like, like, there's so much going on that I just don't know what to say. Um,
Yeah.
'Cause it does, like, I completely get where you're coming from about, games that you can't find people to play 'cause, I don't know that I wanna attack it solo per se, but the game that kind of initially hooked me on role playing was Rifts back in the early '90s.
Oh yeah.
And, like, look, it is what it is. It's a wonderful world, but there's a lot to it, and maybe trying to do something like that solo might be kind of fun.
Yeah, if that's the experience that that you like, sure. It's for me the older rule sets. Yeah, I noticed in the last few decades. No, just kidding. In the last few years, that I have a lot of game books that I really never get to use, and actually I do also have game books that I bought and I never got a chance to use them at all. They're just new in the bookcase. So that's I thought that was a really a mind-opening experience, that I could use whatever I want at whatever time that I want in whatever way that I wanted.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, no, that and like you said, you get the exact flavor that you're going for because you're the only one there.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if you're familiar with Planescape, for example, the campaign setting, the dungeon.
I know of it. I don't know that I ever actually played it. I did play,
Okay.
most of my 2nd edition actually was in Dark Sun, but
Okay. Well, Dark Sun, I don't know. I haven't really played Dark Sun, but Planescape, for example, is really a setting that I never could get people enthused about when I was young. So I really liked the setting, so I bought all the books. But I think I can count the number of times that I actually played it on one hand before solo role playing allowed me to really get to experience the setting. It's also a setting that really requires a lot of getting into the flavor element of the setting, which is also can be difficult for to get a group enthused about, and it's not so difficult to get yourself enthused about it.
yeah, well, it sounds like too, it's the flavor, as you say, is gonna be subjective because your read on it is gonna be different from mine, from Steve's, and so if you're all sitting around a table, now you've got these conflicting flavors where playing it solo, like you said, you get to create the experience you really want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome, and it actually has me really excited to try out. I'm actually gonna pick up an Oracle system, and there's games that interest me that I know that I can't find a group for. So I think I'm gonna definitely get into this and try, throwing a book on the table and trying out that Oracle system. This has been a really interesting conversation and really got me excited to try out this solo RPG stuff that I honestly we didn't know anything about coming into, as I'm sure you can tell by the conversation we've had so far.
Well, and it's also look. There's nobody. You're playing it yourself, so there's nobody forcing you to enjoy something that you don't want. If you don't like solo role playing, that's fine. No one's going to judge you. So if you try it and you don't like it, you can always not not play it anymore.
And that's fair too. I do like that. I wonder if you could use this as a tool, and I don't know if you have any experience. I wonder if you could use solo role playing as a tool to get an idea of how a game plays on a table.
Well, I don't know about that because how a game plays on the table is really, I think, yeah, it's. I think you would certainly get a sense of the rule set and how the combat would go and how the balance of the game system would be, certainly. But how a game feels like on the table is so subjective to the group that you're playing. I think that,
True.
but I think you would get a sense of the game balance at least, sure.
Okay.
So I have a question, and I don't know if you're familiar with the formerly Fantasy Flight, now Edge Studios, Star Wars and or Genesis titles.
Well, I have a lot of the old West End Star Wars stuff, but no, I don't think I have the newer Star Wars stuff.
Okay. Yeah, it's a game engine, was originally designed by Fantasy Flight Games, and now that through corporate whatever is they're now the role-playing stuff is under a company called Edge Studios, which I believe is out of either France or Spain. But in any case, they use a really unique dice system, which as opposed to numbers, gives you advantage, threat, success, failure, triumph, and despair, and they're kind of like separate axes. And I was thinking that that might be a really interesting system because of the way the dice work, to see what it looked like playing solo. And I didn't know if that was anything that you'd taken a look at or had any experience with.
No, I haven't really taken a look at that, but it sounds it's definitely sounds interesting, and it would be a good companion system, I think. There are definitely rule sets that lend themselves easily to more easily to solo role playing than others. Dungeon World is also a good example and yeah, there are several others. Iron Sworn, for example, is kind of a very well integrated form of rule set and Oracle. So there are definitely systems that lend themselves to a well balanced solo game, and yeah, you made me interested, and maybe I'll look it up when we're done.
Yeah, well, I say if you do actually, give ourselves a quick plug, we actually had a conversation that's further back in our podcast feed. I believe it's episode 11. We had someone on that knows the system really well and kind of went through and explained it, because it's different. We actually just got to play it for the first time. Oh, what was that? About a month ago now.
Yeah, roughly.
And it really does, like, you have to think about it differently, because it's not, the numeric side of it just isn't there. It's, because the way the dice work, you can get like both positive and negative results out of the same roll. And it's really different. They actually call it the narrative dice system. And it just seemed to me that is something that would port very easily into a solo.
Yeah, in fact, it sounds like that experience that you're describing is not really that far removed from what other Steve is trying to get a grip on in his head, I think.
Yeah.
So if you have experience, if you had fun with that game, I don't think you're that far removed from actually playing a solo role playing game,
Yeah.
because that's also emergent narrative.
Yeah, yeah, and that's well, and you were talking about ideas and how you go about, minimal prep when you're running games for a table, and both of us have kind of gotten to that stage where, okay, you get some, as I like to say it, my prep is bullet points, and I'm always ready to put them in a different gun,
Yeah, yeah,
because, well, no plan ever survives first contact with the players, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, wow. I mean, I have a feeling, like I said, that there's a ton of information to mine here, but it's almost like we need to do some more learning to really know what further questions to ask. Do you have anything else, Steve?
I think I'm thoroughly, yeah, you have me sold on solo RPGs, and I'm definitely interested in playing, so I'm good with the questions that we've asked so far.
Well, then I guess one thing I would like to give you a chance to do, because I know you do have a Patreon, and I know you have some products on drive through. So, if you would like to take a minute to plug any of your work or anything else that you think would be helpful to people, by all means, tell people where they can find you and your stuff.
Well, I don't really take the approach that I plug my stuff all that much. What I put on my Patreon is basically the resources I wind up with after I play my own games. So if people want to go to my Patreon, it's the Solo RPG Patreon, and you get weekly resources, but they're all based on what I played and what I created for my own. So I don't really. I'm not really all that commercially driven to this stuff.
I understand that, but I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, and I thought that at the very least should offer the opportunity. And I do know you post some stuff on Twitter. That's where I found you. That and through Matt from Mud and Blood / Three Skulls Tavern.
Yeah, yeah. I do like to talk about solo role playing.
So, well, I guess with that, then it's time to do a little something. And I did mention this to you in our conversations before. We like to kind of end the show with what we call Game of the Week. It's just us kind of, we find something on drive through or on itch or any number of places, and we talk about it for a little bit. So would you like to participate in that, or?
Oh, what's the game that you're talking about?
It's one that you would pick. It's a game that you would recommend for maybe the audience to try or play.
Yeah, sure. I'll stick around.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
All right. I know, Steve, you had something already.
Yeah, I do. I'm actually going to talk about Kids on Brooms, which is sort of a sequel to the very popular Kids on Bikes. It's run on the same engine. However, this has sort of that, I guess the way to put it would be that Harry Potter twist where it's kids and it's magic and fantasy, and I think the more I look into it, the more I'm like, I would probably play this over Kids on Bikes because I like Kids on Bikes, but I think there's games that do that setting better, in my opinion, and I think this fits into their world much better than Kids on Bikes. And that's sort of mine. What do you got this week, Steve?
I think I'm gonna go with it's a game I found a couple weeks ago. It's called Stalker, and it's a bills itself as a sci-fi game. It is apparently based on the works of Boris Strugatsky, I believe I'm pronouncing his name right. But yeah, to read a little bit of it, it says the laws of nature have gone insane. Deadly anomalies defy logic and reason. Monsters roam the streets of dead cities, and the bones of the fallen crack beneath your feet. So it feels like it's it's yeah, okay, here it says it's based on the novel Roadside Picnic, brought up to modern times and modern audience. Oh, the novel was originally written in Finnish. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, it's done with license and permission from Boris, like I said, Strugatsky, I believe is the name, but it's diceless and uses a system they call flow, which emphasizes player participation, immersion. Wow, this does sound pretty
You're,
interesting.
you're selling you're selling yourself on this game a little.
Do you guys discuss the games, or do you just pitch the?
Just basically a elevator pitch of the game and what it is.
Oh, okay, so you haven't really played them.
No, well, in some cases, it may be a game that maybe you've played and you really like, but you haven't gotten to play in a long time, and you'd like to make other people aware of. We've done that too.
No, I was going to ask you a question. Other Steve was going to ask other Steve a question about Kids on Brooms, but I was wondering if you just if you're elevator pitching the games, or are you really talking about the games? Otherwise, the question would be a little bit weird.
We just really elevator pitched them just as a way to introduce people.
Okay.
So that's why we sort of talk about games that we're interested in that catch our eye, not necessarily ones that we've really played. Did you happen to have a game that you've been playing recently that you'd like to maybe recommend to people, or
Well, I thought it would be interesting to mention, as we're all experiencing the COVID era, and I noticed during the COVID era, there's been an uptick in people who play by post on forums or on Discord, for example. And there's one game called Calypso, which was written by Tam H, which is also she's really prolific in the solo gaming community. But that's a game that really lends itself well to playing by post. So there's basically basically a system of rules to really facilitate the kind of play that you get from playing by post, where one person describes what happens, and yeah, you have people in different time zones who react to what is happening, and get more of a less grip on where to take the game from there. What happens, which is basically what happens in a play by post environment. It's kind of difficult to describe. But it lends itself really well to that. It's tailored to that experience, which I thought was interesting because I've never really seen a game system that's really tailored to that kind of play.
no, that's really neat. I'll definitely look into that as well because that's a really cool game system. And I haven't seen that's a really interesting take on role playing games, especially with the way the world is now.
Yeah, yeah. It also hooks into Kids on Brooms, which is a collaborative game, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay,
And that's also the collaborative element is also very heavy in play by post games.
nice, nice.
I don't know Kids on Brooms per se. I have heard Kids on Bikes played a little bit, and I know initially when you're setting up the game, there is a lot of collaborative world building, if you will.
Yeah, I always enjoy. Yeah, I always enjoy those types of games.
Yeah. Well, it's just really interesting to me that the different directions that game design has taken, where probably up through it at least, 2000, a lot of it was focused on rule system and structure. And with, I don't know if it was brought about, with the advent of the powered by the Apocalypse engine, or if things just gradually evolved. But it seems like so much of game design at this point has changed to be a lot more about narrative elements as opposed to rule structures and simulation. and I don't know, where that's going, but
Well, I think with that, I do want to thank you for coming on to our podcast, and I want to thank you for being a guest and answering all of our questions.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Thanks for having me.
yeah, thank you very much because, yeah, I mean, I'm going to listen to this a few times in addition to just editing it because there's a lot of information here to digest. So thank you very much for taking the time.
That'll be doozy to edit, I think, other Steve.
Steve here manages pretty well at editing, and
Oh,
he's the beast. He can take care of it, so
we'll see what comes out of it.
I'm sure it'll come out really well. But I do want to thank you for being on, and I just want to remind our audience, be kind and get out there and play some RPGs, whether they be solo or with a group. Either way.
Yep.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can also find us at facebook.com/meandsteverpg. Thank you and be kind to each other.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.